Innocent nurse gave her first time to a billionaire, and he made her an offer that left her in tears. Hello my lovely family, welcome back to another incredible story that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of love. I've missed you all so much, and I'm beyond excited to share this beautiful journey with you today. My beautiful family, the past 6 nights has been the hardest for me. My loyal viewers will notice I haven't uploaded a video since. My laptop crashed the night to my birthday while uploading this particular story. Since then, it has been a lot of back and forth with my technician. I finally had to buy a new laptop so I can meet up with sharing my stories with you while the other one gets fixed. I've been so sad because of this, but I'm glad to be finally back, stronger to share another story. My birthday was on the 2nd of June, and I want to specially thank Nancy Chidawa, who took the time to wish me happy birthday on my post. It made me feel so happy and valued. My family, these past nights of being away, I couldn't sleep, not because of stress, not because of work, but because I was thinking about you, about the messages you send me, about the stories you share in the comments, about how many of you tell me these stories help you feel less alone. And I realized something profound. We're not just sharing stories here, we're sharing pieces of our souls. So, before we begin, I know my birthday has passed, but it will warm my heart so much to see your comments, my family, sending me well wishes. A simple happy birthday will make my day. Now you've done that, get comfortable and let's begin with love. Carol Koch had always believed that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. At 26, she spent her days caring for sick children at Denver Children's Hospital, pouring every ounce of her energy into being the best pediatric nurse she could be. Her tiny one-bedroom apartment in Aurora was a far cry from the life most people her age dreamed of. But Carol had different priorities. Every dollar she earned went toward paying off her nursing school loans or helping her parents with their mortgage. Her alarm buzzed at 5:30 every morning, and by 6:15, she was already on the hospital floor, checking on her young patients. The children adored her. They called her Nurse Caro and would light up whenever she walked into their rooms. Carol spoke to them in both English and Spanish, sang lullabies to the scared ones, and held their tiny hands during procedures. This was her calling, her purpose, and she had never questioned whether it was enough. But her family had other ideas. Every Sunday dinner at her parents' house in the Highlands neighborhood turned into an interrogation about her love life. Her mother, Carmen, would set the table with her best dishes and inevitably steer the conversation toward marriage and grandchildren. Her father, Roberto, was more subtle but equally persistent, often mentioning the sons of family friends who were good catches and ready to settle down. The pressure had intensified dramatically 3 weeks ago when her younger sister, Lucia, announced her engagement to her college boyfriend. The family's celebration was beautiful, but Carol felt like she was watching from behind glass. As relatives congratulated Lucia and discussed wedding plans, Carol caught her mother's worried glances and her aunt's whispered conversations about poor Carol, still single at 26. Misha, her mother, had pulled her aside that evening. Lucia is 23, and already planning her wedding. Don't you think it's time you started thinking about your future? About finding someone to share your life with? Carol had smiled and given her usual response about focusing on her career, but inside she felt the familiar pang of inadequacy. Was there something wrong with her? Why didn't she feel the desperate need for companionship that seemed to drive everyone else her age? The truth was, Carol had never experienced the kind of love her friends described. She'd had a few casual dates in nursing school, but nothing that made her heart race or kept her awake at night thinking about someone. She'd begun to wonder if she was simply wired differently, if romance was something that happened to other people but not to her. Work had always been her escape from these thoughts. The hospital was where she felt most herself, most valuable, most needed. She worked double shifts whenever possible, partly for the extra money but mostly because she genuinely loved what she did. Her colleagues respected her dedication, and her supervisors had already hinted at promotion opportunities. But tonight was different. Tonight, Carol found herself standing in front of her closet, trying to figure out what to wear to the hospital's annual charity gala. The event was mandatory for all staff, held every year at the Brown Palace Hotel to raise money for the children's wing. Carol had attended before, but she usually slipped in late, wrote a small check, and left early. This year her friend and fellow nurse Patricia had insisted they go together. "You can't keep hiding behind your scrubs forever, Caro," Patricia had said. "You're 26, not 96. Live a little." Carol had borrowed a black dress from Patricia, nothing fancy, but it fit well and made her feel more confident than her usual jeans and sneakers. She applied a little makeup, something she rarely bothered with, and pulled her long dark hair into an elegant bun. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The Brown Palace Hotel was a world away from Carol's everyday life. Built in 1892, the historic hotel exuded old-world elegance with its soaring atrium, ornate chandeliers and marble floors. As Carol and Patricia walked through the grand entrance, Carol felt completely out of place among the formally dressed guests who moved through the space with the confidence of people accustomed to luxury. The charity gala was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, transformed for the evening with soft lighting, elaborate floral arrangements and tables draped in pristine white linens. Carol recognized some of her colleagues, but many of the guests were wealthy donors and prominent members of Denver society, people whose lives were as foreign to her as inhabitants of another planet. "Relax," Patricia whispered, noticing Carol's nervousness. "You belong here just as much as anyone else. You're the one actually taking care of those kids they're all here to support." Carol nodded and tried to enjoy herself. She sampled the elegant hors d'oeuvre, listened to speeches about the hospital's mission, and even bid on a few silent auction items she couldn't afford. As the evening progressed, she began to feel more comfortable, chatting with colleagues and meeting some of the generous donors who made her work possible. It was while she was returning from the ladies' room, navigating through the crowded ballroom with a glass of champagne in her hand, that it happened. Someone stepped back from a conversation just as Carol was passing, and she collided directly into him, sending champagne cascading down the front of his pristine white dress shirt and expensive-looking tuxedo jacket. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Carol gasped, her face burning with embarrassment as she watched the champagne drip from his lapels onto his polished shoes. "I'm so clumsy, I wasn't watching where I was going." The man she'd crashed into was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out his tuxedo perfectly. His dark hair was expertly styled, and when he looked down at her, Carol found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. He should have been furious. His outfit probably cost more than Carol made in a month, but instead, he was smiling. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice warm and surprisingly kind. "Accidents happen. Are you hurt?" "Am I hurt?" Carol repeated, bewildered. "You're the one covered in champagne. Let me help you clean up, or pay for dry cleaning, or something. I feel terrible." The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, dabbing at the champagne stains with an amused expression. "It's just a shirt," he said simply. "I'm more concerned about you. You look shaken up." Carol realized she was trembling slightly, though whether from embarrassment or something else entirely she couldn't say. There was something about this man that made her feel off balance in a way she'd never experienced before. He wasn't just handsome, though he certainly was that. There was something in his eyes, a warmth and intelligence, that made her want to keep looking at him. "I'm fine," she managed to say. "Just mortified. I'm not usually so accident-prone." "I'm Christopher," he said, extending his hand with a smile that made Carol's heart skip in a way that alarmed her. "Carol," she replied, shaking his hand and trying not to notice how it completely enveloped hers, or how the simple contact sent warmth shooting up her arm. "Carol," Christopher repeated, as if testing how her name sounded. "That's a beautiful name. Are you here with the hospital?" "Yes, I'm a nurse in the pediatric wing," Carol said, then immediately felt self-conscious about her job compared to the obvious wealth of the people surrounding them. But Christopher's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "A pediatric nurse? That must be incredibly rewarding work, and challenging." For the next hour, Carol found herself in the most engaging conversation of her life. Christopher asked thoughtful questions about her work, listening intently as she described her patients and the daily challenges of caring for sick children. He didn't talk down to her or change the subject to something he found more interesting. Instead, he seemed genuinely fascinated by her dedication and passion. What struck Carol most was how easy it felt to talk to him. Despite his obvious sophistication and the expensive watch she glimpsed on his wrist, Christopher made her feel comfortable, valued, heard. He laughed at her stories about the amusing things children said, and his expression grew serious when she talked about the more difficult aspects of her job. "You're remarkable," Christopher said finally, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made Carol's breath catch. "The way you talk about those children, the dedication in your voice, it's inspiring." Carol felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just do my job." "No," Christopher said softly. "You do much more than that. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? I'd love to continue this conversation." The question hit Carol like a physical force. This beautiful, sophisticated man was asking her out. Her mind immediately flooded with all the reasons she should say no. They were clearly from different worlds. She had nothing to offer someone like him. It would only lead to disappointment. But as she looked into his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and warmth, Carol felt something inside her shift. For the first time in her life, she understood what her friends meant when they talked about butterflies, about hearts racing, about wanting something so badly it scared you. "I'd like that," she heard herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. Christopher's smile was radiant. "Saturday, 7 o'clock. Carol nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As Christopher pulled out his phone to get her number, she couldn't help but wonder what she was getting herself into. But for once in her carefully controlled life, Carol decided to stop thinking and start feeling. She had no idea that the man asking for her number owned half of downtown Denver, or that this single collision would change the course of her entire life. Saturday evening arrived faster than Carol had expected, and she found herself standing in front of her closet once again, this time even more nervous than she'd been for the charity gala. Christopher had texted her the address of the restaurant, and when she looked it up online, she was relieved to see it wasn't one of Denver's exclusive fine dining establishments. Instead, it was a cozy Italian place in the Little Italy neighborhood, the kind of family-owned restaurant with checkered tablecloths, and the smell of garlic bread wafting from the kitchen. When Carol arrived, she found Christopher already waiting at a corner table, and her heart did that strange fluttering thing again. He stood when he saw her, pulling out her chair with a genuine smile that made her feel like she was the only woman in the room. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Carol felt herself blush. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing down her simple blue dress. "This place smells incredible." "It's been my favorite since I was a kid," Christopher said, settling back into his seat. "My grandmother used to bring me here every Sunday after church. The owner, Antonio, has been here for 40 years. He makes the best lasagna in Colorado." As they shared antipasto and talked over glasses of Chianti, Carol found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. Christopher was easy to talk to, funny without trying too hard, and genuinely interested in everything she had to say. When she told him about her typical day at the hospital, he listened with the kind of attention that made her feel valued. "What made you want to become a pediatric nurse?" he asked, twirling pasta around his fork. Carol smiled, thinking of all the children who had touched her heart over the years. "When I was 8, my little brother Carlos got really sick with pneumonia. We didn't have insurance, and my parents were terrified we couldn't afford the treatment he needed. But there was this nurse at the emergency room, Mrs. Thompson, who not only took amazing care of Carlos, but also helped my parents figure out how to apply for financial assistance. She saved his life, but more than that, she treated our family with dignity when we felt ashamed about not having money." Christopher nodded, his blue eyes focused intently on her face. "I knew from that moment that I wanted to be that person for other families," Carol continued. "I want to open a free clinic someday, somewhere in the neighborhoods where families can't afford regular health care. Every child deserves quality medical care regardless of what their parents can pay." "That's an incredible dream," Christopher said, and Carol could hear the sincerity in his voice. "Have you started planning for it, looking into funding options?" Carol laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With my student loans and what I make at the hospital, it's more of a fantasy than a plan. Maybe someday, when I'm older and have more saved up." Christopher was quiet for a moment, and Carol worried she'd shared too much, sounded too naive about the realities of opening a medical practice. "What about you?" she asked, wanting to shift the focus away from her impossible dreams. "What do you do for work?" Christopher hesitated, and Carol noticed he seemed to choose his words carefully. "I work in real estate development, mostly commercial projects, some residential." "That sounds exciting," Carol said. Building things, creating spaces for people to live and work. Christopher's expression brightened. It is, actually. My favorite projects are the affordable housing developments. There's such a need in Denver for quality housing that working families can actually afford. I've been working on a project in the Elyria Swansea neighborhood, 40 units that will rent for about half of market rate. Carol's eyes widened. That's amazing. How do you make money doing that? You take smaller profits, Christopher said with a shrug. Some of my investors think I'm crazy, but I think there's more to business than just maximizing returns. If you can help people and still run a sustainable company, why wouldn't you? As they talked, Carol realized she was seeing a side of Christopher that she hadn't expected. Despite his expensive clothes and obvious sophistication, he cared about the same things she did, helping people who needed it most, using whatever talents you had to make a difference. After dinner, Christopher insisted on walking her to her car even though she'd parked several blocks away. As they strolled through the warm evening air, Carol felt more content than she had in years. "Thank you for tonight," she said when they reached her slightly battered Honda Civic. "I had a wonderful time." "So did I," Christopher replied, stepping closer. "Carol, would you like to do this again?" "Yes," Carol said without hesitation, surprised by her own certainty. Christopher smiled and leaned down to kiss her cheek, a gentle gesture that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "I'll call you tomorrow." As Carol drove home, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in her adult life, she understood what all the love songs were about. Their second date was a walk through the Denver Botanic Gardens, where they spent hours talking and laughing as they wandered among the flowers. Their third was a Rockies game, where Christopher patiently explained baseball rules while Carol cheered enthusiastically for every play. It was during their fourth date, while walking through downtown after a movie, that Carol's world shifted completely. They were passing a sleek glass building when Christopher pointed to it casually. "That's one of mine," he said. "Just finished the renovation last month." Carol looked up at the building, noticing for the first time the elegant bronze lettering across the front, "Wellington Enterprises." "Wellington," Carol repeated slowly, her stomach dropping. "Like Christopher Wellington." Christopher stopped walking, realizing what had just happened. "Carol, oh my God," Carol whispered, stepping back from him. "You're Christopher Wellington, as in Wellington Enterprises." She thought about all the Wellington buildings she passed on her way to work every day, the Wellington name on half the major developments in Denver. "I should have told you," Christopher said quickly. "I wanted to, but what?" Carol's voice was rising, and she didn't care that people were starting to stare. "You've been lying to me this whole time." "I haven't been lying," Christopher said firmly. "I told you I work in real estate development. That's exactly what I do." "You told me you work in real estate, not that you own half of Denver." Carol felt tears starting to form. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I've been sitting here talking about my little dreams and my student loans while you're yours. And what?" Christopher asked, his voice gentle. "You're completely out of my league," Carol finished miserably. "What are you even doing with someone like me?" Christopher took her hands, forcing her to look at him. "Carol, listen to me. The reason I didn't tell you about the business right away is because most people treat me differently when they know. They either want something from me or they assume I'm some kind of entitled rich guy who doesn't care about anything but money. But you talked to me like I was just a person. You shared your dreams with me, your passion for helping people. That's who I fell for, not someone who was impressed by my bank account." Carol wanted to believe him, but the revelation had shaken her confidence completely. "Christopher, we're from completely different worlds. I drive a 10-year-old Honda and live in a studio apartment. You probably have servants and multiple homes, and I have a housekeeper who comes twice a week." Christopher interrupted with a slight smile. "And yes, I have more money than I need. But Carol, that doesn't change who I am or how I feel about you." Despite his reassurances, Carol spent the next week questioning everything about their relationship. Was she just some kind of charity case to him, a way for him to feel good about himself by dating someone real? The doubts consumed her thoughts during her shifts at the hospital and kept her awake at night. Christopher seemed to sense her internal struggle. Instead of pressuring her or trying to impress her with expensive gestures, he did something completely unexpected. On Tuesday morning, Carol arrived at the hospital to find Christopher in the break room with coffee and pastries for her entire shift. "What are you doing here?" Carol asked, touched despite her confusion. "Proving that I care about the things you care about," Christopher said simply. "I brought breakfast for everyone who takes care of those kids you love so much." Carol watched as her colleagues thanked Christopher warmly, and she noticed that he learned everyone's names, asked about their families, and genuinely seemed interested in their work. This wasn't a show for her benefit. This was who he really was. That night, Christopher called her as she was getting ready for bed, something that had become their routine. "How was your day?" he asked, and Carol found herself telling him about a particularly difficult case. A 7-year-old girl with leukemia, whose parents were struggling with the emotional and financial stress of her treatment. "It breaks my heart," Carol admitted. "They're such good people, but they're drowning. The father picked up a second job, and the mother hasn't left the hospital in 3 days." "What would help them most?" Christopher asked quietly. "Honestly, just knowing they weren't alone, having someone they could talk to who understood what they're going through." The next day, Carol discovered that Christopher had arranged for a family counselor who specialized in childhood cancer to meet with the parents, completely free of charge. When Carol asked him about it, he simply said, "You said they needed someone to talk to." It was gestures like these that slowly broke down Carol's walls. Christopher never tried to solve her problems with money, but he listened to her concerns and found thoughtful ways to help. When she mentioned that one of her young patients loved dinosaurs but had never been to a museum, Christopher arranged for a private tour of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. When another child was missing his dog while stuck in the hospital, Christopher brought therapy dogs to visit the entire pediatric wing. After 6 weeks of dating, Carol realized that her feelings for Christopher had deepened into something that both thrilled and terrified her. She'd never been in love before, but she was beginning to understand that this was what it felt like, this constant awareness of another person, this desire to share every small moment of her day with him, this feeling that her life was somehow more complete when he was in it. Their phone conversations grew longer and more intimate. Christopher told her about his childhood, about feeling pressure to live up to his father's legacy, about his fear that people only saw his wealth and not who he really was underneath. Carol shared her insecurities about never feeling good enough, about the constant pressure from her family to settle down, about her fear that she was somehow defective because she'd never fallen in love before. "There's nothing wrong with waiting for the right person," Christopher told her during one of their late-night calls. "I'm 32, and I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. How do you feel about me?" Carol asked softly. There was a long pause before Christopher answered, "Like I've been waiting my whole life without realizing what I was waiting for." Carol's breath caught in her throat. She knew she was falling for him completely, and it was the most wonderful and terrifying feeling she'd ever experienced. It was during their 8th week of dating that Carol made a decision that surprised even her. They were at Christopher's penthouse, the first time she'd been there, ostensibly to watch a movie. But Carol found herself more interested in watching Christopher than the screen. His penthouse was beautiful but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Rocky Mountains. The space felt warm and lived in rather than like a showplace, with comfortable furniture and bookshelves lined with well-worn novels. "Christopher," Carol said suddenly, interrupting the movie. He looked at her with concern. "Everything okay?" Carol took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I've never been with anyone before." Christopher's expression grew gentle. "I know." "How do you know?" "The way you kissed me the first time," Christopher said with a soft smile. "It was sweet and nervous, and perfect, plus you told me you'd been focused on school and work." Carol felt her cheeks burn. "Does it bother you that I'm so inexperienced?" Christopher turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Carol, it makes me feel honored that you trust me enough to even consider sharing that with me. But I need you to know, there's no pressure, none at all. We can wait as long as you want." "What if I don't want to wait?" Carol whispered. Christopher's eyes darkened with emotion. "Then we take it slow, and if you change your mind at any point, we stop. No questions asked." That night, in Christopher's bedroom, overlooking the mountains, Carol experienced tenderness she hadn't known existed. Christopher was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When it was over, Carol lay in his arms feeling like she'd been fundamentally changed, not just physically, but emotionally. This was what love felt like, she realized. This sense of completeness, of being exactly where you belonged. "Are you okay?" Christopher murmured against her hair. "I'm perfect," Carol whispered back, and meant it completely. The next morning, as Carol watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold from Christopher's bed, she knew that whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. She was in love, completely, terrifyingly, wonderfully in love. But as she returned to work that Monday, glowing with happiness, Carol had no idea that her joy was about to be threatened by someone who had been watching their relationship develop with growing resentment. Dr. Amanda Cross, the chief of pediatrics, had noticed Carol's recent happiness and the expensive coffee that had mysteriously appeared in the break room. When she saw Christopher Wellington himself delivering flowers to Carol at the nurse's station, her suspicions were confirmed. Amanda had met Christopher at several hospital fundraisers over the years, and had always hoped to catch his attention. Seeing him with a simple pediatric nurse instead of someone of her own status and education was both infuriating and insulting. As Carol arranged the flowers with a radiant smile, Amanda began formulating a plan to plant seeds of doubt in the young nurse's mind. After all, men like Christopher Wellington didn't marry girls like Carol Koch. They used them and moved on to more appropriate partners. Amanda smiled coldly as she watched Carol's happiness. It wouldn't last long. The first sign that something had changed came on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Amanda Cross appeared at Carol's station during the morning shift change. Amanda was an imposing woman in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confidence that came from years of commanding respect in the medical field. She rarely interacted directly with the nursing staff unless there was a problem. "Carol," Amanda said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "could I have a word with you in my office?" Carol's stomach tightened with worry. Had she made a mistake with one of her patients? She followed Amanda down the hallway to the corner office that overlooked the hospital's main entrance. "Please, sit," Amanda said, settling behind her mahogany desk. "I wanted to talk to you about your recent social activities." "My social activities?" Carol repeated, confused. "I've noticed you've been quite happy lately," Amanda continued, her tone carefully neutral. "And I couldn't help but notice Christopher Wellington visiting you here at the hospital. It's quite the topic of conversation among the staff." Carol felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Dr. Cross, I hope my personal life isn't interfering with my work performance." "Oh, not at all," Amanda said quickly. "You're one of our best nurses. It's just that, well, I feel somewhat responsible for the welfare of my staff, especially the younger ones, and I'd hate to see you get hurt." "Hurt?" Carol's confusion deepened. "I'm not sure what you mean." Amanda leaned forward, her expression growing concerned. "Carol, you're a sweet, hard-working girl from a good family. You've dedicated your life to caring for others, but men like Christopher Wellington, they live in a very different world than we do." "I know Christopher is wealthy," Carol said carefully. "He's been very open about that." "Has he?" Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Has he told you about the other hospital staff he's dated over the years? The nurses and medical students who thought they were special to him?" Carol felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Oh dear," Amanda said, her voice full of false sympathy. "You didn't know? I thought surely someone would have mentioned it by now." "Mentioned what?" Carol's voice was barely a whisper. Amanda sighed heavily, as if this conversation pained her. "Christopher Wellington has quite a reputation for, shall we say, developing relationships with hospital personnel, usually young women who are impressed by his wealth and status. It's been going on for years." Carol's hands began to tremble. "That's not, Christopher isn't like that. I'm sure he seems genuine," Amanda continued relentlessly. "These wealthy men are very good at making women feel special. But Carol, think about it logically. What does a billionaire real estate mogul really have in common with a pediatric nurse from Aurora? Don't you think it's a bit convenient that he just happened to bump into you at the charity gala?" The words hit Carol like physical blows. All her old insecurities came flooding back. The feeling that she wasn't good enough, that someone like Christopher could never really want someone like her for the right reasons. "I can see this is upsetting you," Amanda said, her voice gentle but her eyes cold. I debated whether to say anything, but I've seen too many good nurses get their hearts broken by men who were just looking for a temporary distraction. Carol stood up abruptly, needing to escape this conversation. I should get back to my patients. Of course, Amanda said. And Carol, this conversation stays between us, doesn't it? I wouldn't want Christopher to think I was interfering in his activities. Over the next few days, Amanda's words echoed in Carol's mind constantly. Every text from Christopher, every sweet gesture, every declaration of affection began to feel calculated rather than genuine. When Christopher sent flowers to the nurse's station, Carol wondered if he'd done the same thing for other women. When he called to tell her about his day, she found herself analyzing his words for signs of deception. Have you ever had someone try to poison a beautiful thing in your life because they were jealous? Share your experience in the comments. Amanda seemed to sense Carol's growing doubts and began a subtle campaign to reinforce them. She would make offhand comments about wealthy men who collected women like trophies, or mention newspaper articles about rich socialites and their latest romantic conquests. Each comment was carefully crafted to seem casual while feeding Carol's insecurities. The breaking point came a week later when Amanda called Carol into her office again, this time with what she claimed was photographic evidence of Christopher's past relationships. I really didn't want to show you these, Amanda said, spreading several newspaper clippings across her desk, but I think you have a right to know what you're dealing with. Carol's heart sank as she looked at the photos. There was Christopher at various charity events and social gatherings over the past few years, always with a different beautiful woman on his arm. The captions identified them as dates to various functions, and they were all stunning, sophisticated women who looked like they belonged in his world. This one was a cardiothoracic surgeon, Amanda said, pointing to a photo of Christopher, with a striking brunette, very accomplished from a prominent family. They dated for about 6 months before he moved on. Carol stared at the photos, feeling sick. The women were everything she wasn't. Polished, elegant, clearly from wealthy backgrounds. What was she compared to women like these? And this one, Amanda continued, indicating another photo, was a medical resident here at the hospital. She thought she was special too, until she found out about the others. How do you know all this? Carol asked weakly. Denver's medical and social communities are smaller than you might think, Amanda replied. These things get around. I'm sorry, Carol, but I thought you should know what you're really dealing with. That night when Christopher called for their usual evening conversation, Carol couldn't bring herself to answer. The next day she avoided the areas of the hospital where he might look for her. When he texted asking if everything was okay, she sent back a brief message saying she was busy with work. For 3 days Carol ignored Christopher's increasingly concerned calls and messages. Each attempt he made to contact her felt like confirmation of Amanda's warnings. Of course he was persistent, she told herself. He probably wasn't used to women pulling away from him. Christopher's messages grew more desperate. Carol, please call me back. What happened? Did I do something wrong? I don't understand why you're not responding. Please, just talk to me. Whatever this is, we can work through it. Please don't shut me out. But Carol had convinced herself that responding would only make things worse. Better to end it now before she fell even deeper and got hurt even more badly. On Thursday morning, Carol was checking on a young patient when she heard commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with the security guard at the nurse's station. Her heart sank as she recognized one of the voices. I don't care what your policy is, Christopher was saying loudly. I need to speak with Carol Koch, and I'm not leaving until I do. Carol emerged from the patient room to find Christopher standing in the middle of the pediatric ward, still in his construction clothes, looking desperate and furious. Patients, families, and staff were all staring at the scene unfolding before them. Christopher, you can't be here, Carol said, mortified that he was causing such a disturbance. I can't be here, Christopher's voice carried across the entire ward. Carol, you've been ignoring me for 3 days, after everything we've shared, after the way you looked at me, after what we mean to each other. You owe me an explanation. Please, people are watching, Carol whispered, tears starting to form. Let them watch, Christopher said firmly, his voice reaching every corner of the ward. I don't care who hears this. I love you, Carol Koch. I love your dedication to these children. I love your compassion. I love the way you make me want to be a better man, and I deserve to know why you're throwing that away." The raw pain in his voice broke something inside Carol. She could see patients and families gathering in doorways, nurses stopping their work to listen, but Christopher's words rang with such sincerity that her carefully constructed doubts began to crumble. "She told me about the others," Carol said quietly, her voice shaking, "about your history with hospital staff, about how you collect women like trophies." Christopher's face went white, then dark with fury. "Who told you that?" Carol's eyes darted toward Amanda's office, and Christopher followed her gaze. His expression hardened as understanding dawned. "Dr. Amanda Cross," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ward. "I should have known." "You know her?" Carol asked, confused. "She's been trying to get my attention for years," Christopher said loudly, not caring who heard. "At every hospital fundraiser, every charity event, she's made it very clear she'd like to pursue a relationship, and I've made it equally clear I'm not interested." Carol felt her world shifting again. "But the photos, the other women, what photos?" Christopher demanded. Carol glanced around at all the people watching them, then made a decision. If Christopher was willing to have this conversation publicly, then she would too. "The newspaper photos of you with other women, the surgeon, the medical resident." Christopher's expression grew incredulous. "Carol, those were business events, charity galas, hospital fundraisers, social obligations. Most of those women were colleagues, or friends' dates, or people I was seated next to at dinner. I haven't had a serious relationship in over 2 years, and I've never, ever dated anyone from this hospital before you." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Dr. Amanda Cross appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale as she realized her manipulation was being exposed in front of the entire pediatric staff. Patricia, Carol's friend and fellow nurse, stepped forward from the group of onlookers. "Carol," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Dr. Cross has been asking questions about you and Christopher for weeks. She wanted to know when he visited, how often you talked to him, whether you seemed serious about each other." Another nurse, Maria, nodded in agreement. "She kept making comments about how wealthy men don't marry working-class women, how you should be careful not to get your hopes up." Carol turned to look at Amanda, who was backing away from the crowd with a guilty expression that confirmed everything. The manipulation, the lies, the carefully planted seeds of doubt, it had all been a calculated attempt to destroy her relationship with Christopher. "You made me believe he was using me," Carol said, her voice growing stronger. "You made me think I was just another conquest when you knew how much I love him." "Carol," Amanda began, but her voice was drowned out by the murmur of disapproval from the staff who had witnessed her deception. Christopher stepped closer to Carol, his eyes intense with emotion. "Look at me," he said softly, though his words still carried across the ward. "Carol, you are not a conquest, you're not a distraction, or a charity case, or anything else that woman made you believe. You are the love of my life." Carol looked into his eyes and saw nothing but truth and love and pain at what she'd put them both through. "Christopher, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have talked to you instead of believing her lies." "You were scared," Christopher said, reaching for her hands. "I understand that, but Carol, I need you to know something, and I want everyone here to witness it." He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." On the screen was a photo of an engagement ring, a beautiful, but not ostentatious solitaire diamond in a classic setting. The entire pediatric ward gasped collectively. "You're not just someone I'm dating, Carol," Christopher said, his voice strong and clear. "You're the woman I want to build a life with. You're the woman I want to marry, to have children with, to grow old with. You're my future, my heart, my everything." Carol collapsed into his arms right there in the middle of the ward, not caring about the patients, nurses and families watching their reconciliation. "I love you too," she sobbed against his chest. "I love you so much, and I almost ruined everything, because I was too scared to believe I deserved happiness." "You deserve everything beautiful this world has to offer," Christopher said fiercely, holding her tightly. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." The pediatric ward erupted in applause and cheers from everyone who had witnessed their public declaration of love. Even some of the young patients were clapping from their doorways, delighting in the real-life fairy tale unfolding before them. As Carol looked around at the smiling faces of her colleagues and patients, she realized that Christopher's willingness to fight for their love in front of everyone proved everything Amanda had said was a lie. This wasn't a man who collected women or played games with hearts. This was a man who loved her enough to risk embarrassment, to make a scene, to declare his feelings publicly rather than lose her. From that day forward, their relationship was stronger than ever. Amanda was quietly transferred to another department after hospital administration learned about her unprofessional conduct, and Carol learned to trust in the love she and Christopher shared. But more importantly, Carol learned that real love doesn't just accept you as you are. It fights for you when you're too scared to fight for yourself. And sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are the ones that survive the storm and come out even stronger on the other side. 6 months after the dramatic confrontation at Denver Children's Hospital, Carol's life had transformed in ways she never could have anticipated. The scared, insecure woman who had almost thrown away love because of fear had blossomed into someone confident, radiant, and deeply fulfilled. The most visible symbol of this transformation stood proudly in the heart of Carol's old neighborhood in Aurora, the Koch Wellington Community Health Clinic. What had started as Carol's impossible dream had become a beautiful reality thanks to Christopher's unwavering belief in her vision and his commitment to turning their shared values into action. The clinic occupied a renovated building that Christopher had purchased and completely remodeled, creating a warm, welcoming space that felt more like a community center than a medical facility. The waiting room was painted in cheerful colors, with comfortable seating and a children's play area filled with books and toys. Examination rooms were equipped with state-of-the-art medical equipment, but decorated with local artwork and family photos to maintain a personal, non-intimidating atmosphere. Carol served as the clinic's head nurse and coordinator, a role that utilized all her medical training while allowing her to pursue her passion for serving underserved communities. The clinic provided free basic medical care, wellness programs, and health education to families who couldn't afford traditional health care. They offered everything from routine checkups and immunizations to chronic disease management and mental health counseling. What made Carol proudest was how quickly the clinic had become woven into the fabric of the community. Children came by after school to do homework in the waiting room, while their parents attended diabetes management classes. Elderly residents stopped in for blood pressure checks and stayed for coffee and conversation. Young mothers brought their babies for well-child visits and left with car seats, diapers, and connections to other community resources. Christopher was deeply involved in every aspect of the clinic's operations, but he was careful to let Carol be the face and heart of the project. He handled the business side, fundraising, insurance, staffing, logistics, while Carol focused on patient care and community outreach. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to their mission. Carol's family had initially been skeptical of Christopher, worried that his wealth would make him unable to understand their values and traditions. But Christopher had won them over completely through his genuine respect for their culture and his obvious devotion to Carol. He spent Sunday dinners at the Koch family table, speaking his gradually improving Spanish with Carol's grandmother and helping her father with household projects. Her mother, Carmen, now treated Christopher like the son she'd never had, frequently calling him to share gossip about neighbors and ask his advice about family matters. Ms. Carmen had told Carol just last week, "That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, and more importantly, he sees your heart. That's how I knew your father was the right one for me." At Denver Children's Hospital, Carol had been promoted to head nurse of the pediatric wing, following Dr. Cross's transfer. Her colleagues respected her leadership and her commitment to patient care, and she found herself mentoring younger nurses the way she wished someone had guided her early in her career. The promotion came with increased responsibilities and better pay, but more importantly, it gave Carol a platform to advocate for her young patients and their families. Christopher had also grown through their relationship. The driven businessman who had once measured success purely in terms of profits and development projects now found deeper meaning in work that directly improved people's lives. His affordable housing developments had expanded, and he'd started a scholarship program for students from low-income families pursuing careers in healthcare and education. As the 6-month anniversary of their public reconciliation approached, Christopher began planning something special. The clinic was scheduled to celebrate its official grand opening with a community festival, and Christopher saw it as the perfect opportunity to take the next step in their relationship. The day of the celebration dawned bright and clear, with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Colorado famous. The clinic's parking lot had been transformed into a festival space with food trucks, live music and booths, staffed by local organizations offering information about their services. Children ran between game stations while parents browsed health education displays and signed up for clinic services. Carol moved through the crowd in a flowing sundress, greeting patients, thanking volunteers and coordinating with staff. She glowed with happiness and purpose, completely in her element as she welcomed families and shared information about the clinic's programs. Christopher watched her from across the festival grounds, marveling at how perfectly she fit into this role he'd never imagined for himself. As the afternoon progressed, Christopher took the small stage that had been set up for announcements and entertainment. He tested the microphone, then called for everyone's attention. "Good afternoon, everyone," Christopher began, his voice carrying clearly across the festival grounds. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate the official opening of the Koch Wellington Community Health Clinic." The crowd applauded enthusiastically, and Carol looked up from where she was helping a family register for services, surprised to see Christopher on stage. "Before we continue with the festivities," Christopher continued, "I want to talk about how this clinic came to exist. 6 months ago, I thought I understood what success meant. I measured it in buildings constructed, profits earned, deals closed. I thought I was making a difference by creating jobs and developing properties." Carol moved closer to the stage, curious about where Christopher was going with this speech. "But then I met someone who showed me what real impact looks like," Christopher said, his eyes finding Carol in the crowd. "I met a nurse who works double shifts, not because she has to, but because she can't bear the thought of sick children not getting the care they need. Someone who dreams of opening free clinics instead of vacation homes. Someone who measures success not in dollars but in lives touched and families helped." Carol felt tears starting to form as she realized Christopher was talking about her. "Carol Koch changed my perspective on what matters in life," Christopher continued, his voice growing more emotional. "She showed me that the greatest privilege of having resources isn't what you can buy for yourself, but what you can do for others. This clinic exists because of her vision, her passion, and her unwavering commitment to serving her community." The crowd was listening intently now, sensing that something significant was happening. "Carol," Christopher said directly, "could you come up here, please?" Carol's heart began racing as she made her way through the crowd to the stage. Christopher helped her up the steps, taking her hands as they stood together in front of the entire community. "6 months ago, you told me about your dream of opening a free clinic," Christopher said, speaking to Carol but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Today, that dream is a reality, but I have another dream I'd like to share with you." Christopher dropped to one knee right there on the stage, pulling out the ring box he'd been carrying around for months. The crowd gasped collectively, and Carol's hands flew to her mouth. "Carol Koch," Christopher said, his voice strong despite the emotion in his eyes, "you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. You've taught me what love really means. Not just loving someone for who they are, but believing in who they can become and helping them get there." Carol was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the public declaration and the realization that this moment was actually happening. "I'm not just asking you to marry me," Christopher continued, still on one knee. "I'm asking you to be my partner in changing the world. I want to spend the rest of my life supporting your dreams, building projects that matter, and raising children who understand that privilege comes with responsibility." He opened the ring box, revealing the beautiful solitaire diamond he'd chosen months ago. "But there's something else. If you say yes to marrying me, I want to also offer you something else. Full funding for your dream of becoming a pediatric nurse practitioner, graduate school, living expenses, everything you need to pursue the education that will help you serve even more children and families." Carol's tears were flowing freely now, tears of joy, of overwhelming love, of amazement that her life had led to this perfect moment. The entire community was watching breathlessly, waiting for her response. "Yes," Carol said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes to marrying you, yes to the education funding, yes to being your partner in everything." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as Christopher slipped the ring onto Carol's finger and stood to kiss her. The entire festival celebration had become their engagement party, witnessed by the community they served together. As Carol looked out at the faces of the families they'd helped, the staff they worked with, and the neighbors who had become like extended family, she realized this was what love was supposed to feel like. Not just the romantic love between two people, but love that extends outward to lift up an entire community. This was what transformation looked like, not just changing yourself, but changing the world around you through the power of love in action. What dreams have you put on hold because you thought they were impossible? Drop them in the comments below. 1 year later, on a perfect Colorado spring morning, Koch became Carol Wellington in the most meaningful ceremony she could have imagined. The wedding took place not in a grand cathedral or expensive hotel ballroom, but in the courtyard of the Koch Wellington Community Health Clinic, surrounded by the people whose lives they had touched together. Carol wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her perfectly, with a bouquet of wild flowers picked from the community garden they had planted behind the clinic. Christopher stood waiting for her in a simple navy suit, his eyes bright with tears as she walked down the aisle formed by folding chairs occupied by patients, staff members, neighbors, and both their families. Father Miguel from the local Catholic church officiated the ceremony in both English and Spanish, honoring Carol's heritage and ensuring that her elderly relatives could fully participate in the celebration. When Christopher promised to love and cherish Carol en las buenas y en las malas, in good times and bad, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. The reception was a true community celebration, with food prepared by local families, music provided by neighborhood teenagers, and dancing that continued until well after sunset. Children who had been patients at the clinic served as flower girls and ring bearers, their joy infectious as they celebrated the love story that had brought healing to their community. Carol's transformation over the past year had been remarkable to witness. She was now halfway through her pediatric nurse practitioner program, maintaining her position as head nurse at Denver Children's Hospital, while completing her graduate coursework online and during evening classes. The juggling act was exhausting, but Carol had never been happier or more fulfilled. The clinic had exceeded every expectation they had set for it. In just over a year of operation, they had served more than 500 families, providing everything from routine medical care to crisis intervention. They had expanded their services to include mental health counseling, nutrition education, and even a job training program for unemployed adults in the community. What made Carol proudest was the way the clinic had become a true community hub. Children stopped by after school to do homework in the waiting room. Elderly residents came for coffee and conversation, as much as for medical care. Young mothers found support groups and lasting friendships. The clinic had created connections and healing that went far beyond what any medical facility could typically provide. Carol's relationship with her family had also deepened through her marriage to Christopher. Her mother, Carmen, had finally stopped worrying about her daughter's future, seeing how completely loved and supported Carol was. Her father, Roberto, had developed a close friendship with Christopher, the two men bonding over their shared commitment to family and community service. Nisha, Carmen had told Carol on the morning of her wedding, "When you were young, I worried because you never seemed interested in boys or romance. I thought maybe you would never find love, but now I understand. You weren't avoiding love. You were waiting for the right love, the kind that makes you more yourself, not less." Carol finally understood what her mother meant. Christopher hadn't tried to change her or mold her into someone else's idea of what a billionaire's wife should be. Instead, he had seen her dreams and helped make them bigger. He had recognized her strengths and given her platforms to use them. He had loved her exactly as she was while supporting her growth into who she was meant to become. As Carol looked back on her journey from that first collision at the charity gala to this moment of perfect happiness, she was struck by how much her life had changed and how much it had stayed the same. She was still the same person who wanted to help sick children and serve her community, but now she had a partner who shared those values and the resources to make an even bigger impact. The fiction, the most beautiful love stories, Carol realized, weren't the ones where someone swept you away from your old life. They were the ones where someone saw your dreams and helped you build them into reality. They were about finding someone who didn't just accept you as you were, but who believed in who you could become. and walked beside you as you became that person. I almost let fear steal my happiness, Carol would tell young women who visited the clinic, seeing in their eyes the same insecurities she had once carried. I almost convinced myself I wasn't worthy of real love, because it seemed too good to be true. Don't make the same mistake I almost made. When something beautiful comes into your life, don't run from it because you're scared. Fight for it, trust it, let it transform you. My beautiful family, sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary moments. A collision at a party, spilled champagne on an expensive suit, two people from different worlds discovering they share the same heart. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to believe in love and strong enough to fight for it, that collision can change, not just your life but the lives of everyone around you. Real love, Carol had learned, doesn't just accept you as you are. It sees who you're meant to become, and helps you get there. And that kind of love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth believing in, even when fear tells you it's impossible. This was Carol's truth, and now it was her gift to share with the world. Also, Christopher didn't just give Carol a ring. He gave her permission to dream bigger than she ever had before, and that, my dear ones, is what real love looks like. My family, I put my heart into telling this story because you deserve the best. If you loved this story, don't forget to like this video, share your heartfelt comment and share it with as many people as possible you feel also needs to know their story is not over. Until our next story, take care of yourselves.